motion. So the frame rate. So the frame rate refers to how fast the picture moves, like a flip book, for example. So how fast you flip through the book is expressed as frames per second. So like the old flip books, somebody draws on each page, you flip it through, it makes the character move. Like
yeah.
Same idea. Okay. It's expressed as frames per second on the camera. Example, if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, it's the same as if you read 24 pages of a book in 1 second, right? So it's flipping through quickly. That's how fast the camera is moving. So depending, again, on what you're shooting, it's going to have to be different. If you're shooting an action shot, say you're shooting a sports scene or something, it's going to be a different frame rate. It's going to have to be faster than if you're shooting, you know, an interview where somebody is sitting relatively still. And that's the same thing if you're, you know, you're shooting something that is a you're not shooting video, but you're shooting a still shot, but you want to catch the movement, right? It's a sports shot. You have to think about that, right? How fast is the subject moving? That's when you get interesting shots too, is that, you know, if somebody is running, you know, depending on the frame rate, you can catch them, you will catch them in motion. Sometimes you'll even catch them. If you see like a gymnast, for example, that's been shot up in the air as they're rotating in the air, something like that.
Yeah.
That all has to do with the frame rate because they have to be able to capture that. You have to think about, what am I shooting, right?
Yeah.
I want to capture, because all of that is going to affect what you get in the end in the final shot, right? So common frame rates and their uses. So this is exactly what Chris was just talking about. So 24 frames per second is standard for general use in movies and TV shows. So we're mainly talking about video here as opposed to, you know, still photography. But it does, you know, it obviously affects still photography as well if you're doing a continuous shoot. You should not change unless you have a reason. 30 frames per second is good for sports, as we were just talking about, or if something's moving fast, or fast-paced videos with lots of movement that could benefit from capturing more frames per second. So again, you know, if, like Chris said, a car's moving, a gymnastics competition, a hockey game, anything like that that's fast-moving, you need to have a higher frame rate, right? Or you're not going to catch it properly. Now, sometimes people will do it intentionally in order to make it blurred, you know, if they're, depending on creatively what they're trying to do. But if you're trying to accurately capture something that's fast moving, like sports or something that's fast paced, then it needs to be 30 frames per second.
Oh, okay.
Right? Otherwise, it's just all going to be a blur. So always think about what you're shooting and what you want people to see in the end, right? Whether it's video or still photography, for both of them, it's important. So the common frame rates and their uses, 60 frames per second is used for slow motion. So, you know, you go from 30, which catches fast, that you go up higher, it actually makes it slow-mo.
Yeah.
Right? So it actually goes the opposite direction when you go higher to 60, right? So if you went any higher than that, it's just, again, you're not going to see anything. So 30 is for fast pace and 60 is for slow motion. Again, if you're shooting like a hockey game or something like that and you want something to be in slow-mo, you're going to have to go up to a higher frame rate, right? If you're trying to make a dramatic effect, right? Showing something in slow motion. Or you're trying to capture something in slow motion so that you can show the detail later on. That's another thing, right? Again, that goes back to, you know, I'm just using sports as an example. You know, like the Olympics have now been put on hold till next year, but if you were shooting something at the Olympics and you want to show, you know, a gymnast or a figure skater and you want to show detail in a particular movement that they're doing, then it's going to need to be slow-mo so that you can see the way that they did it. Right? The way that they made that movement, right? So that's where it's going to be useful, is in something like that. How frame rates and shutter speeds work together. Frame rates and shutter speeds are closely related, and that's what I was saying before, that they rely heavily on each other. So it's not just one or the other, they're both important, and just like the aperture is important. As covered, the shutter speed refers to how long the sensor is exposed to light, and frame rate is the amount of frames or information the camera is able to capture in a second. These features need to work together in order to get the best picture possible. Right. So this is what I was referring to earlier, is that, you know, they both, if one's off, the other one's going to be off. Right. The shot's going to be off. They both have to be working together, or you're not going to get the best picture or the best video. Mm-hmm. So you have to be aware of all of this. So matching the frame rate and the shutter speed. As a rule of thumb, you want your shutter speed to be approximately double the number of frames per second that you're recording. Okay, so if you're shooting at a frame rate of 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be set to 1/48 if your camera allows you to. Not all cameras do. Or 1/50th, which means your lens is exposed to light for 1/50th of a second. Okay, so you're doubling the frame rate, right? So the shutter speed is going to be double what the frame rate is.